Welcome everybody to our Healing Trauma with EMDR event here. I'm here with Linda Curran. So I'm just going to give Linda a brief introduction here, then we'll get going. So Linda is an international speaker on the treatment of trauma and the author of both Trauma Competency, a Clinician's Guide, and 101 Trauma-Informed Interventions. She has developed, produced, and presented multimedia workshops on all aspects of psychological trauma. As a sought-after national trainer, best-selling author, and film producer, Linda has trained thousands of mental health clinicians on trauma treatment. She holds advanced degrees in both clinical psychology and public health, and is a board-certified licensed professional counselor, certified addiction counselor, diplomat, certified Gestalt therapist, neurofeedback practitioner, hypnotherapist, and level 2 EMDR practitioner. You can learn more about Linda's work at www.trauma101.com. So, Linda, whenever you're ready, we'll just get started.
Okay. So I jumped the gun a bit. I apologize for that. I'm still Linda Curran, and I still am going to be talking about eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So the idea is EMDR is a misnomer. And the reason I tell you that is because I talked to Francine Shapiro before she passed away, and she said that if she was going to rename it, she would just call it reprocessing therapy today because of the different ways you can provide alternating bilateral stimulation. But I also think that would still be wrong, because I think what the eye movement, there's a desensitization piece of it. And if you ever heard of exposure therapy, or if you've heard of prolonged exposure or in vivo exposure, anyway, what she did was she took some of that work that was exposure work or desensitization work, and she combined it with a bunch of other things. But before I get there, I want to get back to this name here. So eye movement, no, you don't need eye movements. The desensitization piece doesn't really fit, and the reprocessing is not a processing. The problem is that event has never been processed, so we're not reprocessing it. The event is stored in parts of the brain where sensory data is. So, it's where, like, you hear the sounds, you smell the smells, you taste the tastes, you have emotions connected to it, you have body sensations connected to it. It hasn't been brought to the prefrontal cortex, so we haven't made a story of it. The way trauma memories live in our body is, let me say, nothing really lives in your body, but part of the brain that represents the body. So the way the trauma lives, I'm just going to say it anyway, the way the trauma lives in the body is that it comes back in that sensory form. Like you would have a smell of, say, fire, or you would have the smell of alcohol or aftershave or something. And then when you would smell that, that would be a trigger for you, right? So you would smell that, and all the rest of the sensory data comes back, as well as the emotions, as well as the body sensations, just like it was before, right? So when we've been traumatized, that memory, when you come into the therapist office to do EMDR, you're not reprocessing it. What you're doing is activating the memory so it can be processed for the first time, which means, the event that happened had a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's over. What EMDR is very good at, and a lot of the trauma processing are very good at it, is getting it out of those sensory areas and allowing the brain to make a story of it where it did have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So there's a narrative now around it. And the person now, after an EMDR session or after some successful trauma processing session, what you have now is a narrative of this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, rather than a trauma memory. When it comes up as if it's happening again. Your body responds as if you're in the event. Because, whatever images come up for us, like, we talk about triggers, right? But a trigger is just anything that you see, hear, smell, even a body sensation that comes up that triggers a memory. We'll call it a trauma memory, but it triggers a trauma memory to come up, and it comes up bidden or unbidden. So you may or may not want it to come up. I mean, when you're in an office and you're going to do EMDR, you do want it to come up, because that's the time when you want to be able to work with that memory. So eye movement, no. Desensitization, no. And reprocessing, no. It gets even a little trickier when we talk about something called EMDR RDI. And RDI stands for Resource Development and Installation. So when they say something that's EMDR RDI, here's a bigger problem because there's no eye movement, there's no desensitization, there's no reprocessing. Basically, what that is guided imagery, and you add a tapping technique. Now, I'm going to say tapping technique real quick. We do this when we're doing online therapy. We'll do this, and this is alternating bilateral stimulation. It's tactile, right? Some people, you can tap where I was, you can tap on your thighs. Some people snap, although it's annoying. You could tap your feet left, right, left, right. All of those things are just bilateral, like alternating bilateral stimulation, meaning left, right, left, right. So where was I? So that was the gross misnomer, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. What I'm going to do is just go very quickly through these slides because I want to do an exercise with you. But I just wanted to give a little bit of the definition here first. Oh, by the way, I've never done this not talking to anybody and having people there live because usually I can just stop it and cut and, do whatever it is I want to do. EMDR has been advertised a lot by one of the trauma icons in our field. His name is Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and I'm going to show a clip of him talking just a little bit about EMDR. I think I have to push this button. No, not that button.
At some point, the human organism needs to experience what it couldn't experience before. So some condition needs to be created where people can safely visit what has become an odious, terrifying thing. And there's many ways of doing that.
Sorry, Linda, can I just ask you to mute your microphone while this is playing because we're getting an echo?
Yeah, sorry about that.
At the bottom of the screen, there's a little icon. If you just press that little icon.
I don't know where it is. Sorry. Is it the one that has the speaker?
Yeah, it looks like a microphone. If you just run your mouse over that, you've got it. Cheers.
But so at some point, the human organism needs to experience what it couldn't experience before. So some condition needs to be created where people can safely visit what has become an odious, terrifying thing. And there's many ways of doing that, but the most important thing is that the mind, the brain, the body needs to be calm enough to visit something that has always been a source of terror. And how do you get calm enough? Sometimes somebody touching you helps. Sometimes making a movement can help you. Sometimes doing EMDR can help you. Tapping acupressure points oftentimes makes people feel safe. Learning how to keep your body calm by becoming an experienced mindfulness practitioner probably makes it safer. That's the research that we are working on right now. If you can really practice becoming a very calm and mindful person, you get a much greater capacity to visit things that before were too scary to visit. Trauma needs to be processed, so you need to be able to go there in some ways. And you need to go there. You can go there somatically, as in somatic experiencing and sensory motor. You can go there in your mind, as in hypnosis, or in IFS. Or you can go there sort of in this interesting hypnopompic state that EMDR induces, where people sort of go there, and then what's so fascinating about EMDR is you set up some process in the mind that people very little talk about very little, and you set up these fascinating associative processes. So you go through EMDR, little pieces of fragments of the past get expectorated in some ways and start being knitted together. And to my mind, that's really the unique thing about EMDR, is this sort of very rapid processing of of these fragments. But, you know, EMDR is a lovely trauma processing technique, and you don't need to be a genius to learn how to do it.
The sea is calming for Stephen Carey. Here, the crashing waves help him forget about how he's faced violence and death several times. As a child, as a young Marine, and even as recently as 5 months ago, just a few blocks away, one terrible day in Santa Monica.
An unknown number of people, as you know.
It was the day a driver sped through the farmer's market and killed 10 people.
It happened so fast. You have no time to think about it, you just react.
Stephen can walk through the stalls of the market now and recall how he dove out of the way of the deadly car.
I remember thinking he was gonna run over my legs. He was gonna hit my legs.
Now he can talk about the overwhelming destruction and the death.
She was lying on the ground, really bad head injury and bleeding out.
He remembers how he tried to use skills he learned in the Marines to help the injured, and how one woman died in his arms.
With her, there was nothing I could do. And it's sad.
Stephen can talk about that traumatic day now, but it wasn't always so. After the tragedy, he went back to work at a nearby bicycle shop. But for days, he was unusually nervous, shaky, couldn't sleep, became withdrawn. And when he went back to the site of the tragedy...
I saw the memorial that they had already set up, and immediately that just brought back a flood of emotions, and I broke down.
Stephen was flooded with painful memories he had kept bottled up inside, some going back to his childhood.
He was violent and abusive to myself, my sisters, my mom.
An alcoholic father burned down their house and once dangled him over a bridge.
I was staring down 100 feet, afraid I was going to fall.
Stephen also faced death as a tank commander on one of the first units to cross the Kuwaiti border during Desert Storm.
I remember they were expecting like 50% casualties by the end of day one.
You thought you were going to die?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
The overwhelming memories triggered by the farmer's market incident forced him to get help. Stephen came to the Amen Clinic for a brain scan.
If we look at these red areas, they're all working hard.
Dr. Daniel Amen is a psychiatrist and brain imaging specialist.
When we see people who've been traumatized, what we see is their brain works too hard. There are certain emotional centers in their brain that just appear like they're on fire.
Dr. Amen says Stephen's brain shows all the signs of post-traumatic stress disorder.
We need to get rid of all those triggers.
The treatment Dr. Amen prescribes is EMDR, Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. This is Stephen's first session with therapist Sarah Gilman. He follows a moving light, listens to alternating tones, feels impulses tap on his palms, all while he focuses on traumatic events in his past.
There were so many people that I couldn't help.
Okay, so it's a painful process for Stephen, as the therapist keeps him focused on his feelings.
I'm just sad. I wished I could have done more.
One memory stirs up another.
And where did your thoughts go?
I was just thinking about my uncle. Who was a firefighter.
Gilman listens to Stephen's memory of his favorite uncle who died in a fire helping others and tries to guide Stephen to a better self-image.
Perhaps your strong reactions and your fast pace helped as many people as you could help. Are those characteristics you share with your uncle?
As Stephen hears her positive words, the EMDR stimulates both hemispheres of his brain and helps his nervous system reorganize his memories.
And when you activate the area of the brain where the information is stored, then you can begin to move that information to a part of the brain that is more efficient in terms of its storage, so it won't produce then the negative consequences or symptoms of post-traumatic stress.
Even after the first session, the brain scan shows an improvement. And after the sixth session,
I'm definitely not as shaky.
Physically and emotionally, Stephen is functioning better. After EMDR, revisiting the past no longer brings on the same symptoms of post-traumatic stress.
I realize that there's a lot of things that I've carried along with me from the past that now I was able to let go of. And put them where they should be, which is in the past.
That was Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Dr. van der Kolk wrote the book called The Body Keeps the Score. I did a few interviews with him, and I've done some interviews with the rest of the I would say, the thought leaders in the community. And EMDR is I would say it's pretty well respected, but that's new. So I think you guys are in the UK. So let me say, I know that Prince Andrew let people into one of his EMDR sessions. It was a remote one. So it was just like you and I are talking. Well, I'm talking to you right now. And basically, when I was saying yesterday, I was saying a little bit earlier, what he was doing this. This is called the butterfly hug. And that's something that I want to do with everybody. But I think I'm going to need to see you. So when I get done this little PowerPoint, I'm going to see if I can see some of you so I know if you're following me or not. We're going to go to the next slide.
The traumatic memory. And before the trauma is resolved, you see the images, you smell the smells, you hear the sounds, and then you process the trauma, and it becomes a story. And so it's taken out of these sensory areas of your brain and moved into the prefrontal cortex. How that precisely happens, we don't know at this point. And you can make wonderful theories about it, but theories are just a bunch of words. What's so sad for me is that we did this EMDR study, and our subject did extremely well, and I'm pretty sure that our EMDR study had by far the best outcome of any PTSD study ever done. And so that would make some other people say EMDR is the treatment of choice. I wouldn't say that, but it certainly proved that there is something unique and amazing about EMDR. Then we went back to NIH to do more studies to see what's actually going on there, and there was absolutely no interest. The money simply is not available at this point to do the scientific enterprise of trying to solve whether it's the orientic response or the corpus callosum or all the different theories that people have about EMDR. We simply don't have the money to go there.
Okay.
So there's a role for methods, and I think it's very good for clinicians to become very good in a number of different methods and to learn it thoroughly. Most people then integrate them and do a combination of things. I love EMDR, but anybody who says I'm an EMDR therapist, I go, that's like saying I'm a hammer carpenter. Like, it is a little technique that helps people to process memories, but it's not a comprehensive piece. It is a lovely, wonderful, in my hands, indispensable technique. I wouldn't know how to be a good trauma therapist without having that skill. But it's just a skill.
Francine Shapiro, she developed the EMDR. She called it a complex, highly specialized therapy. Now, I will tell you that not many people believe that. Most people believe what you just heard, that Bessel van der Kolk said, that it is a lovely little trauma processing technique, that he wouldn't know how to be a trauma therapist without it, but it's a skill. And basically, that's the way most of the people that I know think of it in those terms. Now, there is a book that this woman by she wrote, the working title was The Four Faces of EMDR, but it's called EMDR Made Simple. Her name is Jamie Marriage, and she divided the whole community, let's say the EMDR community, but divided people into four groups. And the first group were people like Francine Shapiro and people who very close to Francine Shapiro, where there's a woman by the name of Marilyn Luber and a few other people that have these books that are called scripted EMDR. And I cling very tightly to, this is what you do. They are called EMDR therapists, and the only thing they do is EMDR, right? So then she says there's another group of people where she puts herself and a woman by the name of Laurel Parnell and another woman called Robin Shapiro, who they do and teach EMDR, but they use everything else as well. It's like, you don't forget you're a therapist because you learned this tool. And then she puts me and a few other people in the category of, I'm a Gestalt therapist. I don't believe there's such a thing as an EMDR therapist anyway, but I'm a Gestalt therapist who uses EMDR when it's the right thing to do for the person who's sitting in front of me at that moment. And then there's another group of people that she says people that were in the EMDR community and basically left the community because they developed something different. There's a woman by the name of Shirley Jean Schmidt, who does something called developmental needs meeting strategies. And basically, she developed that because EMDR was a bit flooding for some folks, right? And what it was, there was a lot of attachment issues that people hadn't thought about and hadn't covered. So she developed this thing called developmental needs meeting strategy, where it would be like a phase one of therapy where you're getting people the skills to stay stable before you begin to, actively process memories. There's another guy by the name of David Grand. David Grand took EMDR and all his training in EMDR, and he developed something called brain spotting. And brain spotting has to do with not necessarily eye movement, but eye fixity. So even though EMDR uses you can use all three different kinds of alternating bilateral stimulation, there is something to the eye movements. If you think about the way the brain is developed, the retina comes off of the brain in the very beginning. So it's brain matter. So there is something to it. If you think about a mother holding the baby, when they do eye to eye, that's on day 2, right? Or day 1 or day 2 of life. So it's already developed there. So there is something to the eye movements, but it can't really be the eye movements that are the only thing that are effective. It would only be that eye movements were the only thing that was effective. Since we have both the auditory and the tactile stimulation that works just as well, they have to go back and figure something else out. But Dr. Shapiro was a cognitive therapist, and she also was going through cancer treatment, cancer therapy at the time when she made this discovery. She was in this park, and there's it's a whole mythology around Francine Shapiro's walk through the park one day. Basically, what she said she was thinking, really, she was considering her disease process and some of her options, and she was very distressed. And her eyes, all like just without her doing anything, her eyes started moving very, very quickly from side to side. And it's called Cicada Movement, right? And we do it rapid eye movement when we're sleeping. We don't do it on purpose, and she wasn't doing it on purpose either. But she noticed that after her eyes moved that way, that her own distress level came way down. So she thought, well, this is interesting. So let me think of it again. So she thought of, something that was upsetting to her, and she noticed that she was very distressed, and she took that under her own volition, right? She took it under her own control and moved her eyes back and forth as fast as she could. And she did notice again that her distress levels came down. So as we do, women, since we're so affiliative, she went back to her office and she said to a few of her colleagues, "Now, listen, think of something that's, makes you a little bit anxious or, upsets you." So, she practiced and said some of the people like, "Okay, so you have it?" Yeah. And said, "Okay, now move your eyes back and forth, use the corners of the room. That'll be fine. Use the corners of the room." But some people really weren't able to do that kind of tracking. So she would have them, she would get about 18 inches away from them and move her hands back and forth, right? Like this, move her hands back and forth. And as long as the eyes were crossing the midline, she that it was, it was going from the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere, left hemisphere, back and forth. So that was how it started, right? And then, like I'm going to move these slides, but that was really the beginning of it and the beginning of the mythology. EMDR combines several therapeutic methods, so psychodynamic, cognitive, behavioral, with these eye movements or other forms of bilateral stimulation like hand taps or sounds. It involves recalling a stressful past event and then reprogramming the memory in the light of a positive self-chosen belief. Now, what that means is, so you remember this event, right? And so what Francine did, since she was a cognitive therapist, was, and she was also a researcher, she was not a clinician. So she was very interested in doing some pre and post studies on what she called EMD at the time, eye movement desensitization, because what she did was she took a fellow by the name of Wolpe. Wolpe was the one that developed prolonged exposure, which is an exposure treatment. And this exposure treatment means that you bring up the event in your head and you let your body go into that full fight or flight, right? That means you have adrenaline pouring out into your blood all through. You have blood and adrenaline and sugar go into all your muscles so you can run faster or fight harder. right? So when that happens, right, I'm sorry, I was going to say, when that happens, we usually are able to run or fight and get rid of all of that energy, right? That's usually what we do. But in trauma, what happens is we either freeze or we are overwhelmed, right? We freeze, we're overwhelmed. We don't have the resources to really move adaptively. We don't have the coping resources to move adaptively through whatever's going on. So all of that energy that is undischarged, it starts to become those symptoms of trauma, right? What are they? High anxiety, insomnia. I can't sleep. I'm nervous all the time. I'm hypervigilant. I'm just on edge all of the time. But there's also a thought. Not with like if it happened to you before the age of 3 or something, you don't usually have a thought. That thought basically comes up as I'm going to die. But if something happens to me where I'm overwhelmed, right? And the thought, it's like say it's a car accident, single incident. So I'm get to the point where I see the worst of it is all this light is shining at me and I see just these shards of glass coming towards me. That's the image, right? So that image comes up and then the emotions come up of fear, terror, whatever it is, right? And I notice the body sensations, but the thought is a negative cognition. It means a global irrational thought. The thought that comes up with that memory network is I'm going to die. Right now, it's a negative cognition, meaning it's a global irrational thought because I am sitting here today. So I had this experience, I didn't die, but when that memory network comes up, in that network is I'm going to die. So when the memory network comes up, I have the same body sensations, I have the same emotions. That thought comes up. And it happens the same way every time. So what she was going to do, what she decided was, well, we're going to take this event, we're going to desensitize. So we're going to get the body to stop responding into fight flight, right? So stop the adrenaline from pouring out. Stop the stress hormone cortisol from pouring out. And once that's done, then we're going to change that cognition. So what she would do is she would ask the person to say, bring up the image that represents the worst of it, right? So they do that. And now, what is the negative cognition when you have that image up? I'm going to die. Okay, so what would you like to believe when you have that image up? What would you like to believe? Well, I'd like to believe that, I did the best I could and I'm sitting here because that's actually what happened, right? So she says, now when you have that image up and you think that thought, I did the best I can and I survived, how true is that? Where 1 is totally false and 7 is totally true. It's about it doesn't feel true. So it's about a 3. Okay. So now she says, okay, now what I'm going to do is ask you, keep that image up, keep that thought up. What emotions come up for you? And what body sensations? So you have the person bring the emotion comes up. The body sensations really are the emotions too, right? Because every emotion has a locus in the body. So you ask them, where do you feel it in your body? And then and then they say, I got a little tongue tied. Hold on one second. So we have the image, the emotions, the body sensations, and the thought. Now she decides, so once we get that whole memory network up, it's really not a way to ask questions like, of your thinking brain, because now what happened is your body's responding as if, it's happening again. So you're not really thinking anything except, you're only thinking about that threat. So she's thought, well, I have to get this negative cognition and change it to a positive cognition. I have to be able to measure that. So she figured out, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll use this scale 1 to 7. It's a Likert scale. That just means that there's a middle point there. So then she says, now I have to ask the questions before I ask for emotions and body sensations, because when that happens, the person isn't thinking really anymore. They're just kind of experiencing it again. So she would ask for the images. When the image would come up, what's the thought? What's the emotion? Where do you feel it in your body? And then she would do what's called a SUDS. And a SUDS is subjective units of distress or disturbance in the body. Now she has 2 measures here, right? Cognitive therapist, she's a researcher. So she has in this hand, she says, okay, now we have a new cognition, which is I did the best I could, and a believability or a validity of cognition of 3. And then we have a SUDS of, say it's 0, no distress, 10, the worst you can imagine. We now have a SUDS of 9. So now we have pre-measures, and then we're going to do a session where we do this EMD. It was EMD at the time, now it's EMDR. We would do this session, and then at the end, we check them again. So once the SUDS was at 0, right, so there's no distress or disturbance in the body at all, you have the person keep the image up, and now you say, with that image up, and think that thought or say that positive cognition. I did the best I could. I survived. I'm here, whatever it is for the person. And then you ask them how much they believe that now. So after there's no more fight flight energy coming up, all those emotions are no longer there. Now the person is in their window of tolerance, or if they can think and feel at the same time. So when you ask them the question, with that image up, what's the thought now, right? Is it, it's more positive? Is it, I did the best I could, I survived? Does that fit? Person says yes. How much do you believe that? Well, I believe it at a 7. So now you have pre and post measures, right, where you've brought the SUDS all the way down, and now you've reprogrammed, right? You've reprogrammed that image with this new adaptive or positive cognition, she called it at the time, but we've changed it since then. All right, I'm going to see if I can make this work. We're going to the next one. Okay, so it used to be on her website. She used the example of a rape victim, right? So there was a rape victim who absolutely knows that it was the rapist's fault, absolutely knows that. But when that memory network comes up with the image, emotions, body sensations, and that thought, if that thought is, it's my fault, it doesn't matter how much she believes it or absolutely understands. When that memory network comes up, this part, the thinking brain, goes offline, right? So that memory network contains this dysfunctionally stored negative cognition. It's part of this. It's part of that memory network. So she says a rape survivor may know that rapists are responsible for their crimes, but this information does not connect with the feeling that she is to blame for the attack. The memory is then dysfunctionally stored without appropriate associative connections and with many elements still unprocessed. So the memory is then dysfunctionally stored. So dysfunctionally stored, that's a better word than saying, I would say dysfunctionally stored rather than reprocessing, because it's stored somewhere, but it's in a temporary storage place, which is, meaning that it hasn't gone into long-term memory yet, right? It takes a while for things that have happened for us to process them and then put them in a narrative of this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Then we take that information and we say, what does this mean to my past? And what does this mean to my future? And guess what that is? That's the normal learning process. That's what we do every day, almost all day, every day. But trauma is different. Trauma means my resources that I brought, right? Internal resources, my ability to tolerate distress, my ability to regulate and recognize and regulate my own emotions, my ability to know what I need, put it out into the environment, and, with the knowledge that it's not going to get met 100% of the time, and I can tolerate that, but I'm able to communicate my needs, know what they are, communicate them, and interpersonally effective. Let's say that I can communicate my needs and I can get my interpersonal needs met. And mindfulness, right? So say I have the ability to stay present even if I'm triggered, right? Or I have the ability that if I'm triggered, I'm able to bring myself back very quickly, because what happens with trauma is what's called dissociation. So when there's this point of overwhelm, what happens is, it doesn't matter how strong you are, what happens when the nervous system determines you ain't getting out of this, right? When the nervous system determines you're going to die, it gets you ready to die, meaning it pours out endogenous morphine, right? So it pours out all these opioids. So when you die, it's going to be rather pain-free, and your awareness recedes. It goes away. So you're going to die with the least amount of pain, right? And the least amount of awareness. And that is a gift, right? It's an absolute gift that nature or evolution or God, whoever, has given us. The only problem is when you don't die, right? Because when you don't die, now you have this, what we'll call this dysfunctionally stored memory, because there are no associations to this, say, this car accident I was talking about. Not doesn't mean anything to my past, doesn't mean anything to my future. When that memory comes up, I get my hands start shaking, my palms start sweating, my throat gets dry. my mouth gets dry, my throat closes up, all of this happens. And it doesn't matter that I know it's not happening, right? That I know I survived it, because when that memory network comes up, the nervous system, it sees the images, and perception is reality to the nervous system. Okay. So we're going to move a little bit on here. Let's see. All right. So she says impressions of the trauma get stored in the nervous system through the defense mechanism we use to cope with the incident. She'll say splitting off or dissociation, right? So we don't really have the time to deal with the pain. I don't know if anybody's ever had a physical an accident, a physical accident. I was crippled at once, and I remember laying there and nothing hurt. Right, I didn't have any pain medicine either, but my body was pouring out, tons of opioids. And when you say, was I split off? Well, there was a part of me that absolutely was split off, right? But if I was able to keep talking to somebody, if you ever notice, that's what paramedics do. They look you right in the eye and they talk to you and they say, I'm going to be with you until we get you to the hospital, and then we'll turn you over to the nurses who are competent. That's the whole idea, is to keep you present. I like to tell this little story when I do trainings. There's a guy called Paul Ekman. Paul Ekman, if you ever heard of this TV show called Lie to Me. It works with micro expressions. If any of you have seen the OJ trial, they used to stop that Cato Kalin's camera. They'd stop it, like when he would say, "Oh no, OJ and I were friends." And you'd see him like where his nose was, he had this contempt look, but it was like a micro expression. So that's Paul Ekman's work, is micro expressions. And why am I talking about micro expressions? I forget. I'm sorry, I'm a little ADD and a little bit discombobulated here, but I'll go back to my dissociation part. How about that? Let's see. Back to Francine says, as a result of this dissociation or splitting off, right, we are blocked from learning new ways of seeing the situation. Therefore, we re-experience the symptoms of the initial trauma when other stressful events trigger us in the present. So we can get trapped in these recurring anxiety, depression, phobias, panic attacks, and the like. When the individual thinks about the trauma, or when the memory is triggered by similar situations, the person may feel like she's reliving it, or it may experience strong emotions and strong physical sensations. The idea is that EMDR links the memory of the trauma with present-oriented adaptive information. Now, they don't know why it works. So, I always say to people, well, you're not going to use it because you don't know why it works. Well, if you go to the PDR, which here is the physician's desk reference, if you go there, 97.4% of all of the psych meds, it is a mechanism unknown. So as much as we've learned in the decade of the brain, we're still it's in its infancy, and we know very little. So it's unknown, but it appears that the alternating bilateral stimulation relieves the anxiety associated with the trauma, so that the original event can be examined from a more detached perspective, somewhat like watching a movie of what happened, which allows for cognitive reorganization, which in turn leads to spontaneous emotional or behavioral changes. I want to tell you something about a guy by the name of Dan Siegel. Dan Siegel did something that I think is so fantastic. First off, he's a child psychiatrist, and he's brilliant in his own right. But he got very interested in trauma. He's very interested in mindfulness, but he also needed to talk to kids. So he developed a language that I've been using with my clients forever now, because it's so easy when you think about it, because you have to understand a little something about the brain to understand why EMDR might work, right? So he talks about the brain in the palm of your hand. Now, I'm going to try to find this here. Okay, so the brain in the palm of your hand. He says, like, so if I'm sitting this way, right, so my head's facing this way, right here would be my forehead, right? I'm going to have you do it if you can. You're going to put your thumb here, and then you're going to put your fingers over top of it, and you're going to turn it towards you. Okay, so right now you're just looking at these two middle finger nails, all right, because it's a very special part, but I'm just pointing it out for a minute. So this would be, put it up here. So this would be your brain when you are not triggered, or when you are not under an undue amount of stress. So your brain is integrated. This part would be the spinal cord. this part would be the reptilian part of the brain, which is the brain stem and the cerebellum, right? But the brain stem is just everything that's automatic, everything that if you had to think about, that'd be all you could think about, because it's about heart rate, right? Your arousal levels, sleep-wake cycles, sugar, how much sugar your body, how much glucose body gets produced, right? So all of that, all reptiles have it, all mammals have it, and all people have it. Now, that I believe in evolution, just for the record. But anyway, here, 200 million years ago, mammals split off from reptiles. Okay, so they got something that reptiles don't have. This is called the mammalian brain, or the emotional part of the brain. And the emotional part of the brain obviously contains all that affect and emotions, but it also contains the attachment system. So the attachment system is in this part of the brain, the mammalian part of the brain. Reptiles, you may be very close to your iguana. You may think that you may feel very attached, but your iguana cannot attach back, right? It doesn't have the hardware to do it. So you have an amygdala and you have a hippocampus. The amygdala is the smoke detector. Danger, danger, danger. Doesn't matter if it's real. I think it's dangerous. I think it's dangerous. Like you almost step on it looks like it's a stick, but all of a sudden you jump back and you think it might be a snake, right? So that's your nervous system doing that. It's not the cognitive part of your brain. This is this part of the brain and this part, right? These two together, we say fight, flight, freeze, right? Fight, flight, freeze, or filiate, right? So these are together they work fight, flight, freeze. But the amygdala is the smoke alarm. Then we have a hippocampus, and the hippocampus is the general. It's really in charge, and it's also the part of the brain that puts things in context. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. So the hippocampus is really important for long-term memory, right? For long-term potentiation of memory, it's the key player there. So we have the attachment, we have the smoke alarm, and we have the general that is going to put things in order. Paying attention. Now, about 100 million years, 100 million years ago, I don't know, I think that's right, we developed what's called a cortex. And the cortex literally means covering or bark, right? So it covers these parts of the brain. It's on top of these parts of the brain. And humans, of all the primates, we have the biggest cortex, and our frontal cortex is huge relatively. And also these part where these two fingernails are right here are the integrative part. So it integrates not only the reptilian, the mammalian, and the thinking part of the brain, but it also connects to the body. All of the information from the organs, your viscera, all of that, it comes up through the spinal cord and through peripheral, comes up and it goes through the brainstem and it comes up here to the insular cortex, right? Insular cortex is about right here. Insular cortex is how I feel, right? With this high heart rate, feeling dizzy, or with feeling sick in my stomach. That's in this part of the brain, right? The emotional part of the brain, that's there, right? So I think PTSD was the first disorder that really says, look, there is no mind-body split, right? Because all of this information from the body is being fed up here, and it's a complete feedback loop. Nothing that happens in my gut doesn't get registered in the brain, and nothing that happens in the brain doesn't get registered in the gut. For every 20 fibers coming up from the gut to the brain, one goes back to feedback. It's a feedback system. Almost everything in our body has a feedback system. So we have this here. We have this brain in the palm of your hand, and when you can think and feel at the same time, that's called you're in your window of tolerance. When something happens where it's something that is dangerous, right? And the amygdala says, danger, Will Rogers, danger. Well, this part goes offline. He says, you flip your lid, right? He talks about it in terms with the kids of, you may know that you're not going out to play with your friends. If you punch your sister, if you punch your sister in her stomach because she, wrecked your game or whatever she did, you're not going to go out. But when you're that angry, that part where that information is not available to you, right? You have to be able to breathe yourself back down, calm yourself down, take deep breaths, extend the exhalation, until you can bring the thinking part of the brain back on, and then you can make a better choice. Otherwise, you're acting like every other mammal in the wild who feels under threat, right? There's no thinking about it. You may have heard this before, but stress makes you stupid. Acute stress, all of us lose 10 IQ points, and some of us cannot afford to lose 10 IQ points. So acute stress really means that all you're looking for is where is the threat in this environment, right? So when this part's offline, we're not doing our best thinking, right? So when we're like this, there's a little bit of thinking going on, but really all it is where where's the danger and how do I get away? So Francine says, if you're stuck in old memories, you can't have new behavior, right? I want to stop right here for a second because I want to tell you, as a Gestalt therapist, Gestalt therapy works with unfinished business, right? And PTSD is the quintessential disorder of unfinished business because it's unfinished physiological business, right? That whole reptilian part of the brain, it's unfinished emotional business, it's unfinished cognitive business. And if we don't, if we, you're going to read this right here, we can't change our behavior until we learn. Right. And we haven't learned yet because this memory is still dysfunctionally stored, has not been processed yet. So Francine says, if you're stuck in old memories, you can't have new behavior. Only changing the outcome of past events can result in new behavior in the future because the purpose of memory is to prepare you to deal with the future. That's it. This up here is a prediction machine. That's what it does. That's its job. How do I stay safe and how do I play and make it to the next day? In addition, traditional therapy or psychotherapy focuses on talking about or playing out conflicts, which accesses the left hemisphere, right? So the left hemisphere of the brain is more that logical, linear, whereas the right hemisphere is the emotional hemisphere, it's the relational hemisphere, and it's also the embodied hemisphere. That might make some sense to some folks because the emotional, right, the embodied and the relational are all right hemispheric functions. So if you know anybody who kind of has avoidant attachment or goes towards narcissism, that's because they depend very heavily on their left hemisphere. But trauma is housed in the right hemisphere, right? Relational, embodied, right? Embodied and emotional hemisphere. So any traumatizing thing that happened before the age of 2, 3, really you can't talk about it, right? Does it mean you can't work with it? No, you absolutely can work with it, but it's not about thinking about it, or it's not about talking about it because there wasn't language, and the hippocampus doesn't get wired up until about 2.5 to 3 years old. Okay, so again, in addition, traditional therapy focuses on talking about or playing out conflicts with access to the left hemisphere of the brain, while the trauma memories are stored in the right hemisphere of the brain. If the traumatic memories and experiences are going to be resolved, the therapist must engage in activities that first access the right hemisphere. You have to access the right hemisphere, and how do we do that? Well, we ask for the sensory data, images, and then we ask for the emotional data, image, emotions, and then body sensations, right? These are all, when I say embodied, these are all the right hemisphere functions, right? So we activate the trauma memory network in the right hemisphere. And once that gets activated, what usually happens is this part goes offline and that memory network just gets reinforced, right? We're actually re-traumatized. We're going to get to EMDR in just a second, but when I saw this sentence the first time, I thought, how do people get away with this? Van der Kolk and others suspect that EMDR works because the alternating bilateral stimulation distracts the client from the traumatic memories and allows the brain to be changed. I was like, really? But then I understood what it meant. I finally got it. It took me a long, long time. What it means is that when you have, just say, I'm going to give you these tappers to hold in your hands, or I'm going to have you move your eyes back and forth and cross the midline, right? These are the alternating bilateral stimulation, right? When it says it distracts it, just think about it. We have this memory network, right? Image, emotion, body sensations, maybe a thought. Every time this comes up, this part usually goes offline. The hippocampus is right here where I said we have amygdala and a hippocampus. The hippocampus, whenever anything stressful happens, it tags it and then goes offline because there's no sense in long-term potentiation of memory if you're going to be dead, right? Survival first, right? So it tags the memory, then it shuts down, right? So every time the memory comes up, the same thing happens. You flip your lid and the memory network just gets reinforced rather than changed in any kind of way. So when I read this thing, I thought, oh wow, that's bizarre. So they're just saying that it works because they distract the client. But it honestly, what it means is if I'm holding these tappers and it buzzes over here, right? So now neurons over here in the somatosensory cortex that never fired before. And by the way, information moving, that's what neurons firing means. So there's information moving in the somatosensory cortex that never moved before when this memory network was activated, right? So guess who has to pay attention at this point? The hippocampus. The hippocampus is the general. If it's novel, the hippocampus has to come back on. It can't just check out, has to come back online. It says, well, this is novel. Is this dangerous? No. Is this interesting? No. So it goes back to the memory, right? It gets distracted and then it goes back to the memory. But then it buzzes over here. So now neurons over here in the somatosensory neurons fire there that never fired before. Information is moving here that never moved before, right? So the hippocampus again has to pay attention, right? What is this? It's novel. Is it dangerous? No. Back to the memory. Now, if you're going to, if I hand you these two pulsars and you're holding them and they go buzz, 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 and it's the same pattern. How long until this pattern recognition machine figures out buzz, 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 that it doesn't have to pay attention anymore? Like there's this fan that's been going on in this computer next to me, and I'm not paying attention to it the whole time, right? But if it went off or it just came on, it would cause me to look at what is that, right? So it's novel and I orient towards what's novel. And then if it's not dangerous or interesting, I come back to whatever it was I was thinking of. And in this case, it was the memory, right? So when it says it allows the brain to be changed, the brain to be changed means that neurons that fire together wire together, and neurons that no longer fire together, no longer wire together, they break their long-term relationship, right? So that's what that sentence means. And I thought, wow, I can't believe they get away with it, but it was just so smart. I didn't get it. Let's say when the right side of the brain is triggered to produce those trauma memories, the focus of therapy needs to shift to triggering to the left side of the brain, because the left hemisphere has the ability to help clients resolve their trauma, while being stuck in the right brain only keeps you stuck in that trauma, meaning you're going to reinforce that memory network deeper into the memory network, into the memory circuits. Okay, so every time the memory network comes up, it gets stronger, right? And so more likely that when an image comes up, the whole memory network will come up. Let's see. And now this is the way, what I just said to you was what I do with my clients is how I explain it to them is I have a ton of information on EMDR. So I know there's a lot of you here. If you are interested in it, trauma101.com has it. But also if there's anything you want to know about it, you can email me. Because I have tons of information, and I have smart clients who, when some of them I say to them, I have tons of information, they say, well, if you think it's going to work, let's just give it a go. Right. And so I don't have to always use it, but I have a lot of it. So if you want it, let me know. I have it. But the way I explain it is, again, I do the triune brain with people, right? So I do the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, the thinking brain, body coming up, flip your lid, right? And the idea for when we're doing EMDR is we are absolutely going to activate that neural network, right? So the neural network is all of the neurons that fired together at that time, all of the sensory images, all of the emotions, all of the body sensations, and if there's a thought with it, that too, right? So the thought is a left hemisphere thing, right? Right hemisphere, once we're trying to activate the right hemisphere. So if that thought doesn't come up right away, we just skip right over it. And why is that okay? Well, because I am not doing research. I don't need a pre and a post anything. What I need to know is the client now has no distress, right, or disturbance in the body, and they now have a new thought that is paired with this, the image that represents the worst of it, right? So we get to a SUDS of 0. The person has a new present-centered adaptive thought, and we do a little relaxation technique to tap that in, and then we keep the image up and say, okay, we'll just scan your body for any leftover fight flight energy that's still there. But when we talk about the neural networks, it's yes, this is the neural network that is the trauma network. So we have to activate it I know you really don't want to activate it because we spend most of our life trying not to think of this. But what we're going to do this time is a little different. Once we activate it, it's not going to get reintegrated. It is not going to get, further into those memory network circuits. This time, something different is going to happen, and that something different is that it's going to buzz here, because I use that tactile, right? Say it's going to buzz here, and these neurons that never fired before are going to fire. Now, what else do I have to do, right, as a clinician? Well, before we even talk about EMDR, right, assessment is really the key to this, because EMDR for single incident trauma is, and I don't say this about many things, but it is a miracle, right, for a single incident with people who have had, just think, relatively, I don't want to say good or good or bad lives, but I want to say they got their needs met. They got what they needed. They had parental situation where whoever was the primary caretaker was able to see the child. They were able to hold them in their mind and heart. They were able to mirror them. When the child was happy, somebody went, "Oh, you're happy," and brought them up. Or somebody said, "You're very, very mad." So they named these emotions for them and they mirrored them back to them. And they felt protected. They felt nurtured. The bad things happened, but maybe they weren't, obviously they weren't chronic. Some bad things happened, but they had the resources. They had a mother and a father, or a father and a father, mother and mother, that whatever, they had people that were able to do this for them. And their worldview was basically, the world is pretty safe, and I get my needs met, right? So when something happens to somebody that has that worldview, when something like a rape happens, just something that you think, like interpersonal trauma in some way, the person's, it's not like you've ripped the rug out from under somebody. Their whole ground is gone. Nothing makes sense in single incident, because all along the person's living their life as if, as if their world were correct, their worldview was correct, right? And then when this incident happens, everything's in question, right? So these folks most of the time look much worse than people that have developmental trauma and have complex trauma. These people look way worse. They're activated all the time, right? When they come in, their eyes are like real big, pupils are real big, they're on edge. They're looking all around, for what's the next, what's going to happen next, And after an EMDR session, they have no symptoms. Okay, 0 symptoms. So when I say miraculous, it's miraculous, because single incident trauma is horrible to have, right? Symptomology is horrible, but it's so easy to treat. We have a lot. It's not EMDR. It's not the have all and be all. We have other trauma treatments that work pretty much just as well, if you're good at it. But that's single incident. People that spend any amount of time in my office, or any amount of time in people who work with developmental trauma or complex trauma, the first year, there's no mention of EMDR, because these folks aren't coming in with the same worldview. Their worldview is not, the world's a relatively safe place and I'm going to get my needs met. That should work out. Things are going to work out for me. That is not it. What it is they know that there's danger in the world. They know that it's very likely they're going to be hurt again. As a matter of fact, the person the person sitting across from me, I am the next person that's going to betray that person. That's the worldview that they come in with, because when you've been traumatized your whole life, interpersonal traumatization, if somebody comes into my office and they've had that and they trust me right away, I know therapy is going to take a whole lot longer, because they haven't generalized. Most people that have had tons and tons of trauma, they look much better than people who've had single incident, because they have a whole bunch of compensatory mechanisms going on, right? A lot of that being spending a lot of time in the left hemisphere, right? Thinking. I've cut off from my body because my body's doing things that I can't control, right? These body sensations, or if I've had sexual trauma, that I had the body was the cause of that. That was, in quotes there. So the body's doing stuff that I don't have any way to stop it from doing, and I don't have the relationship. So I'm cut off from here to here, and this body is just a transport object to bring my head over there, right? So I try to spend most of the time in my head, even though the body will break through, because as if you know anything about, not just the body keeps the score from Bessel van der Kolk, but trauma and the body remembers. There's about what's the other one? The body. There's 6 of them I have right behind me. I could turn around, but I'm not going to. So anyway, triune brain, neural networks, interrupting long-term neural relationships. Remember, neurons that fire together, wire together. Neurons that no longer fire together, no longer wire together. They break their long-term relationships. So the way we interrupt these relationships, right, is by using either the eye movements, right? So if I was using the eye movements and I look to the right, neurons back here in the visual cortex that never fired before are going to fire again. Neurons firing means information moving. Then I look to that way. Neurons over here that never fired before are going to fire, right? So again, information's moving that never moved before when that memory network came up, right? So this is what's different. There's something different, something novel that's happening where the hippocampus has to pay attention. So at the end of an EMDR session, just back to say single incident, the end of the EMDR session, once the client's calm enough, right? So they moved through, they got rid of all of that fight flight energy, they've moved through some of the emotions, are calm enough, this part starts to come back online, right? So once that's back online, you could do a SUDS at that point and say subjective units of distress or disturbance in your body, and they say it's a 0 or a 1, and then you say keep that image up. What's the thought now? You don't have to front load that in the beginning like Francine did, right? She needed to have a pre and a post for the cognitions, and she needed a pre and post for SUDS. We don't need either of those, but at the end, at the end, when the image, you ask the client to bring the image up, and the SUDS is at a 0, you say, keep the image up. What's the thought now? You don't have to say, remember what I told you earlier, or you told me that you wanted to believe. You don't say that, just it comes right out of the processing, right? So since I no longer have my body saying, you better get the hell out of here, or you better fight, I no longer have all of these vehement emotions of rage, shame, terror, whatever. They're gone. I've moved through those. By the way, emotions are transient. That's only if you feel them. If you push them away, they don't go away, right? So once you've moved through those, then you go into the thinking part of the brain, so then it's with that image up, what do you think about yourself, or what do you think about the world now, right? What's your belief now? And when the person says this, I believe I'm safe now. Now, that doesn't sound like a positive cognition, right? It doesn't have to be, I'm the goddess of the universe. It's, I'm safe now. That is a more present-centered, adaptive cognition. So you say, okay, keep that image up and think that thought or say the words. And I'm just going to have you do a real short set of this. Take a deep breath in. You're going to extend the exhalation. So what are we doing? This is to bring on the relaxation response, bring arousal levels down. You can't be relaxed and anxious at the same time. That's the whole theory there, right? So you're telling them to take a deep breath in. When you extend the exhalation, you bring the parasympathetic nervous system online, which means all the arousal has been decreased. So you have this. You have the same image that you started with, but you have this new thought with it, and the body's not telling you to do anything, and the emotions have already been moved through, right? They've been processed. So when I say reprocessing isn't right, it's kind of just me being kind of a bitch about it, but it really isn't. They haven't been processed. They've been dysfunctionally stored for a later date, or dysfunctionally stored, and that means that those symptoms come out sideways, right? They come out that you don't know what they're from. You may have had something, then you just think in the beginning it's like a state, I'm hypervigilant, or I'm hyper aroused all the time. And then if it doesn't, if you don't process the memory, it really becomes traits, like I'm an anxious person. I have panic attacks. It becomes like this who I am. And then if there's no processing of that memory, they become medical symptoms, right? So that's even single incident. But when most of the people that we see in our office, we're seeing people who have had developmental trauma. So we're not doing rehab with anybody. We're doing HAB with those folks, meaning those skills to stay stable, distress tolerance, right? Emotion regulation, mindfulness, right? All of those, interpersonal effectiveness. Those person needs to have those skills in order to do an EMDR session. And that's the clinician's job, to collaborate with the client. Okay, how do you think you're doing, and those kind of things. But I know from in session how people are doing when they get triggered, how fast does it from trigger to calm, all of those things. How are they doing in their everyday, right? If I start doing EMDR with somebody, or if anybody does, and their person's life starts getting worse, meaning they start to have more flashbacks, or there's been 3-4 weeks where I didn't sleep well for 3 of the nights out of that. I'm dissociating more. Stop doing EMDR, because it means that the person is not, they're not being helped by EMDR yet. They still need to develop those skills, because without those skills, what we're doing is re-traumatizing people. One of the questions that was sent to me from y'all was, what about complex PTSD? The whole deal with complex PTSD, or developmental trauma, so let me just say, complex PTSD can be months to years of trauma in adulthood, but ordinarily what we see is developmental trauma, meaning that when the brain was developing, because of the attachment situation, or because, physical, whatever happened to them while their brain was being developed, they don't have the skills, so they need to learn the skills. Now, somebody with single incident that comes in, they may look like shit, right? They may look, scared to death, like like all the things I said before, they may look like that. But after, you do a good assessment and you do one session, it's really a follow-up phone call, right? So nobody's getting rich on single incident trauma, and that's a good thing, right? Now, developmental and complex trauma, we're working with usually something that was acute on top of all of this developmental stuff, right? And so you have soldiers, I've seen soldiers, I've seen first responders, people come in, and basically what happens is when we start doing EMDR, they start processing early memories, right? And one of the things that is a beautiful part about EMDR is what you heard Bessel van der Kolk say was, you don't really have to talk about it, right? If you think about the traumas in the right hemisphere, language and logic is in the left hemisphere. So if I'm experiencing something, the best way to stop experiencing it is to start talking to you, right? So in Bessel's book, he writes about it. He was talking to a psychiatrist, and he's, he was having this experience on the couch, and he knew that he could come out of the experience and fill in the psychiatrist, or he could have the experience. He couldn't do both, and that's the thing with it. You don't have to talk about the trauma, which, so some of these first responders or some of the combat vets, they're really dealing with a lot of, like, they're dealing with sexual abuse early in childhood, physical sexual abuse, some neglect issues. They're dealing with it. They wouldn't talk about they wouldn't do this if you had to talk about it. So EMDR is a blessing for those reasons. I think Francine Shapiro, again, she died 2 years ago, I believe, 2.5. But she was a philanthropist. She was a researcher. She was fantastic cognitive therapist, but she was not a clinician, right? She was a cognitive psychologist, and she wasn't a clinician. So the clinicians took EMDR and modified it for each group that they were going to see. And the particular population I work with is adults who have had developmental trauma and have been acutely traumatized, or really just continuously traumatized through their life. They're the people that may have heard of personality disorders, right? Personality disorders really are just trauma early and often. Right? That's what you're looking at. So people think of them as intractable. They're not. They're not. It's there's work that has to go into it. With EMDR, what we've done is something that I think is pretty good, because what we've said was, when you think about this, say we're going to work with this one memory, when you think about this memory, what was missing, right? Because the definition of trauma is an overwhelm of resources that causes the nervous system to shift states, right? The nervous system is supposed to be flexible. It's supposed, if I need a little bit of adrenaline to take a test, I can get it. If I need a lot to run away from somebody, I can get it. If I'm injured or I'm going to sleep, I don't need any, so I don't get any, right? That's a flexible nervous system. What happens with trauma is it becomes fixed. You're either hyper aroused, right, and flooded, or dissociated and shut down, right? So it's kind of bipolar in that way, right? So you're either this or this. There's no flexibility for me to get a little bit of adrenaline or moderate amount of adrenaline. It's when I get triggered, the whole thing comes. So when we ask a client something like, what was missing? Well, I didn't have anyone to protect me. Well, what we do is do some imaginal resources where we have them either bring up a time when they felt protected, a time when they protected someone else, or something they've seen on TV, something they read in a book. Some people will use the Hulk, some people will use their childhood dog, some people will use their uncle, whoever, somebody or some animal that made them feel that they were protected by. So what you do is you bring that up in the imagination. Right. I might have to stop here because I think that Niall said I have to stop talking at some point, but I do want to do an exercise with you. And the exercise is about these imaginal resources. So I want to do something that's this lemon thing with you. And then I want to do a container and a comfortable place imagery with you using this alternating tapping, because that's really what's different. For people that have complex PTSD, we need to develop these new neural networks, to really compete with these other ones that they have. With single incident, really all we ask them to do is bring up something that we used to call safe place, right? And that was just in case a person was starting to feel too overwhelmed or too flooded at the time, that you could just take a break from EMDR and they could visit their safe place. Doesn't work very well with people with complex trauma, because when you say safe place, the only thing they think of is, oh, I was never safe or threat. So we kind of say that we'll do a comfortable place, or a place where you just feel okay. The other one is we do nurturing figure. Sometimes we do adult self or ideal self. With kids, it's much easier because they don't know that some of these things might cause shame in adults, but these are all imaginal, so you don't really have to talk about them.
We've got a few questions here, Linda. If you're happy to take them, I can just go through some of them with
Or
you now,
fine.
if that's cool. So first question here is from Mona. How might this work with traumatic brain injury where memory might be impaired?
Okay, where memory might be impaired. Well, when you have TBI, the other thing is TBI and PTSD, they share just about all the same symptoms, right? So I've done many EMDR sessions with people with TBI, but if you have traumatic brain injury, you generally have a neurologist as well. So I have a letter that I write, just kind of sign off on it and then say, I am going to be doing EMDR on this client, which means I am going to deliberately activate a traumatic neural network, which will bring on the stress response, right? Is there any reason I shouldn't do this? That's really the question that you asked, and you would ask it. If your therapist doesn't ask it, you should ask it of your neurologist, or you should ask it of at least of a GP. I think you guys have the same terminology.
Okay, great. Next question is from Annalise. Does this work well with neurominorities?
We're talking about spectrum. I think that's what you're talking about. But the answer is absolutely. I just say absolutely you can use it, and absolutely that is individual, right? It's individual. You have to make sure that the individual has the skills to stay stable, just like for anybody else. A lot of people that are on the spectrum, a lot of their trauma comes from the way the environment treats them, right? I mean, I'm hoping I'm answering the right question, but they're traumatized because they're overwhelmed because their sensitivity is very, very high. Similarly, in borderline personality disorder, we see the same thing, right? They take in more information. They feel their feelings more intensely than others, and if they need more downtime. And for at least on the spectrum, people are frightening, right? So, I mean, that's when you go into a school where you see kids with autism. They're huddled. They're huddled down like this, and they really, you would say, they look scared of you. So a lot of things overwhelm them. And again, the definition of trauma is an overwhelm of resources that leads to a nervous system shift in state, right? If that's what's happening, with your client, or if that's what's happening, if that's you who are on the spectrum, then you just have to be able to. When I say the skills to stay stable, it's for that person. So I mean, people that are on the spectrum, they're not going to actually be able to be regulated by you. So they have to have, even, I would say, even a better degree of self-regulation, because auto-regulation is tough for that crowd. I just want to go back to the TBI question too, because it was about memory loss, right? The question was, if they don't have the memory, all you do, it's the same thing for everybody. This isn't just for TBI. If there's memory loss, what are you treating? What would you be using EMDR for? We don't use EMDR for a history of anything. We use it because the trauma is playing back and causing symptoms in the body today. So say you had a trauma when you were a year old, right? You have no memory of the trauma. People told you you were in this car accident. It was terrible. It was terrible. It was terrible. But there's no memory and there's no symptoms. You don't do therapy on that. That's not something you would do EMDR with, right? If you have, let's say, you're about 9 months old and you don't have any memory and nobody told you anything, but you have just body sensations of choking. You have body sensations, a feeling of dread, and body sensations that feel like you're gagging and choking, right? Now, some therapists might go to, oh, well, that may be some sort of sexual abuse. Well, it also may be a dentist. It also may be a doctor. It may be something like that. So none of the therapists should give any kind of interpretation, but you can absolutely do EMDR with that, because what you're asking for is to activate the right hemisphere, which is the body sensations, the emotions. It's not about the thought or the memory. It's about the way what the body remembers, and the body does remember. So you're treating those symptoms, right? So absolutely. Same thing with the TBI. This is the same thing with everybody. Before you go, I have your book here. The question, I have it written in all of my manuals. People always want to know if I could buy one book. Laurel Parnell pays me no money, nothing. She gives me nothing. And this is the book that I recommend, A Therapist's Guide to EMDR. Basically, Laurel and I had the same situation, whereas working in community mental health with people who were abused in childhood, and EMDR, straight up EMDR, just re-traumatized folks. That's what it did. So this book actually explains all about EMDR, but then how do we resource people who have these types of histories, right? So that's the one book. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
No worries, no worries. Okay, so next question is from Melina. What kind of work needs to be done with someone with attachment trauma, for example, neglect or abuse, before you can do EMDR?
Well, we have to do therapy first, right? So, like, again, I don't believe in EMDR therapists. I don't think that's a real thing. Before you can do EMDR on somebody, say they come in with neglect and abuse are different, because with neglect, there is nothing where there should be something. So it actually takes a bit longer, right? Abuse, there was engagement, there was relational, it was bad, but it was relational, and there was engagement. You have to do everything. They call it, like, there's an 8-stage model, but the first stage in EMDR is every single thing you need to do to get a person to the point where they're ready, willing, and able to do EMDR and feel safe enough to do it. So what do you have to do? Well, you have to do therapy. You have to do an assessment. You have to develop rapport. You have to develop with the client all of those skills to stay stable. The nice thing about DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy, is Marsha Linehan packaged them really well, right? So there's four sets, right? Interpersonal effectiveness is one. Distress tolerance is one of them. Emotion regulation is one of them, and mindfulness. And if you don't have mindfulness, you can't do EMDR. Just think about it in terms of, when you're sitting there, you have to be connected with the other person's observing self, because the client's observing self needs to be with me here as the experiencing self goes back and experiences what it couldn't do before, right? Has to have a dual awareness. This person is here with me. They hear my voice. I'm taking deep breaths to regulate their breathing as well. So the person has to be able to be interpersonally regulated, and they also have to be able to self-regulate. That's a lot of skills, especially, like I said earlier, if you have developmental trauma, you're not doing rehab and just reminding people of what, of like, oh, you used to have this, you used to be able to do it, you can't anymore. No, you have to teach all of those skills, and they have to be able to use them, right? If you do EMDR with somebody without the skills to stay stable, you're re-traumatizing somebody. That's what you're doing. There's no other word for it, right? I don't want anybody to be scared of EMDR because it is certainly not a weapon of mass destruction. The problem is when people deliberately destabilize somebody who doesn't have the skills to restabilize themselves, right? If you think about the window of tolerance, right? What our job in therapy is to keep increasing that person's window of tolerance so they don't go into dissociation and shut down, or they don't get hyper aroused and out of their, out of their window of tolerance to the point of overactivation. So if it's not like people aren't ever going to do that, but they're able to bring themselves back into their window of tolerance, whether through self-regulation or through another. And as I'm saying, when you're working with somebody that has developmental trauma, once you get all that done, you're done phase one of Francine's 8-phase model, right? That's phase one. So once you have all the skill, the client has all the skills to stay stable. They understand what EMDR is. They understand that they're going to be activating a traumatic neural network, which means you're going to ask for images, emotions, body sensations, and the thoughts. So, you're doing the first and worst memory. Usually that's what you do first, the first and or worst memory, right? And that means you're going to ask somebody to go back to the absolute worst time of their life that they can remember, the worst feelings, the worst sensations, whatever it is for them, and they have to agree to do that. Right. And they have to trust you enough that it's going to be different this time, that at the end of it, it's not going to be worse and it's not going to be the same. Right. That there will be progress, even if it takes more than one session, there will be progress in that. But the question is, how long does therapy take? Well, if you had somebody in your childhood that could hold you in their mind and heart and saw you and could mirror you, right? You have a better, you're not going to be in therapy as long. But if you didn't, all of that needs to be developed if it's neglect. You really have to develop the relationship and have people developing other relationships that are kind and loving. And if you think about people that have had abuse and neglect, they don't do real well in relationships because they keep playing out their old patterns, right? They play out their old patterns of either avoidance or anxious or disorganized, like just going back and forth that, between being, anxious about the relationship and then being overwhelmed by it and trying to get away, right, to avoid it. So you have a lot of work to do, but that has nothing to do with EMDR. If you think of EMDR, it is a late stage intervention, to be used to process memories when it's going to be helpful. And it's not going to be helpful until the person has those skills. That's the biggest question. It's the biggest question. But it's EMDR it's only a miracle for single incident trauma. It certainly isn't. It's very helpful for complex and developmental trauma, but that's afterwards. No, that's after after they have the skills to stay stable. Okay.
Okay, 100%. Okay, next question is from Carissa. Carissa is curious how you integrate EMDR with your Gestalt practice. She's recently completed EMDR training and found that some clients still wish to narrate some of their experience and reflections, having processed their memories. However, on the training she undertook, there appeared to be no room for this. As an integrative therapist used to a very dialogical way of working, she was curious to hear you say something about your experience on this, and if indeed this has been your experience.
I'm not sure I understand. I'm curious how you integrate. Oh, well, I'm a Gestalt therapist. I integrate EMDR into Gestalt therapy, not the other way around. Right. So EMDR is a tool that I use. I teach it because it's a good tool, but I'm a therapist first, and this is one of my tools. I have a lot of tools too, right? So I learned SE, I learned like psychodrama. I do those things too, but I don't know anybody who except for those, there's a group of people that are really, with tambourines and the sheets, and EMDR is this big cult, and you have to do exactly this, and this. And if you're not doing it that way, then, then you're not doing EMDR. Well, then you're not doing EMDR. But what you are doing is you're activating a traumatic memory network and processing it to the point where there is no disturbance in the body, and they now have an adaptive thought with it. I say, how do I, I'm trying to look at haven't processed the memory, still wish to narrate. People are allowed to narrate. Is that what the question is about, narrating? Yeah, sometimes wish to narrate some of their experience. So if a client wished to reflect further after processing their memories, oh, absolutely. The question says here, so if clients wish to reflect further after processing their memories in session with you, you allow space to discuss this therapeutically. That's therapy. Of course I do. I tell clients when we're doing the EMDR that they absolutely don't have to say, they don't have to talk at all, but they can say whatever they want. Now, having said that, I know when my clients talk to distance themselves from the experience, and they know it too. So it's very easy to call people on it because you know who they are, right? If you don't know who's sitting in front of you, don't do EMDR on them anyway, right? But this particular thing is, if they want to talk to me about what was so cool, absolutely, yeah. What was important for you is generally the question I ask. Was anything surprising? That's one of the questions I ask. Basically the first, after you do the first session with somebody, I just make sure that people are going to go home. They have a self-care routine, right? And I won't do it with somebody who doesn't have that, because it means that they're not ready. To me, it means they're not ready. It might not be for everybody, right? But if they say, no, I have to go to work, well, we'll say, well, I'll do it at a time when you don't have to go to work, because the integration piece is huge. You're doing this whole processing, and then you have to integrate that experience. It's kind of like, I don't know if anybody works with psychedelics, but it's the same thing. Integration is the most important piece. You have to be able to integrate how is this helping your life? Not just there's a memory and now the memory is not so charged. So if you have a single incident and that happens, you have a memory that's not charged anymore, it's a narrative, you're cured for single incident. With complex PTSD, you have a relationship with your client for a long, long time. So if they want to talk to me about something, that's the first thing we're doing, right? During the session, I try to say, I do this at every training too. I say, you don't have to say a word, but you can say as much as you want. Ask yourself the question, are you doing it to get out of the experience? If it is, just say that to me. If you want to stop, we'll just put everything in a container, and we'll try again another time where we'll do something different. EMDR is not, it's not like if EMDR doesn't suit you, that I'm done with you, right? Or you're not going to be, you're not going to be able to clear trauma. We'll just do something differently. I'm still reading. I want to know if I answered your question. So, oh, that's great. Oh, yay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think there was,
10 out of
oh,
10.
good. So I thought there was one more question that I didn't answer. That was before I was carrying on with this EMDR, but there are more studies supporting. Oh, okay. Yeah, the one about cognitive processing therapy, Steve. EMDR
Yeah, go
folks
for that one.
often use the refrain that trauma needs to be accessed on right side of the brain and only. Yeah, that's wrong. But there are more studies supporting CPT for resolving PTSD than EMDR. I disagree with that second statement. Could you comment on that? Yes. Well, the laughter was true. Yes. I don't know why anybody would say that, because we have the way you activate the trauma memory is just you ask for images, right? Because what's the right hemisphere, right? It's all the sensory stuff, right? And we ask for the body because what is in the right hemisphere? It's the embodied hemisphere, right? If it's interpersonal trauma, what is the right hemisphere? It's the relational hemisphere, right? So the trauma is usually housed there, but you can activate it through, you can tell a story, you could do sand tray, you could color a picture, you could draw a picture of it, you could. Some people have dreams, right? And their dreams are nightmares and they wake up at the same time, but that dream is actually the brain trying to process the memory. But, it gets to the same point in the dream where this part goes offline and they wake up like this, right? So you can do EMDR on that as well. Say, what was the worst part when I woke up and all I could feel, you get them back to the moment that was the worst for them. I think that that's really funny that they say that only EMDR can do that. People who have trauma, they get triggered all the time. EMDR is not doing that. Those memory networks are pretty easy to trigger. Otherwise they're not really problematic, right? If you have to try real hard to activate a memory network, is it affecting you day to day, right? I don't know that that's true. If you can send me some, I know that right now the Veterans Administration will only, it's EMDR, PE, and CBT. CPT is not even. CPT. I know what it is. I don't know. Christine Courtois and I have big conversations about it, but EMDR has more data for single incident trauma than any of them, right? So there's PE, there's CBT, and there's EMDR that the Veterans Administration endorses, and EMDR has more data than both of them combined, right? So for single incident trauma, hands down, EMDR has the data. It's not saying that it's the best. I'm just saying it has the data. For complex, none of my clients would ever get into a research because they all have comorbidities, right? They all have something else wrong with them, so they would never be accepted in a study. So how do we say, I'm going to take all of these studies on single incident and I'm going to extrapolate them to my clients who look nothing like it and have none of the same symptomology, right? I mean, they have to remember who's doing the research and why are they doing the research and who's paying for the research and what else did those studies say? I don't have anything against CPT. As a matter of fact, there's one thing that I really liked, and I was told that it's not being taught as part and parcel to the method. Butcher paper, that butcher paper that you get a big thing of it and you kind of just roll it all the way out, and they do a trauma timeline and they walk their trauma timeline on CPT. And it was one of the best things. It's kind of psychodrama, anything that's an embodied approach to it, I'm all for. And when you use CPT with that trauma timeline and walking it and doing it that way, I think it's super effective. So I don't have a problem with it, but I don't think EMDR owns anything. But also I don't know that CPT has more. I don't think that's, I mean, send me the data if that's right. I'll change my stick.
Okay. And we've got a couple of questions from Toby here. And Toby has asked, what is the minimum number of sessions recommended for EMDR? And then the second question is, could you please explain the qualifications and levels of EMDR
Well,
therapists?
I'd say the minimum numbers of sessions recommended for EMDR depends on the person sitting in front of you. So if you have single incident, if I have a client with single incident and I am absolutely certain of that, it's usually one session and a follow-up phone call. If you're working with complex PTSD, you could have if you have complex PTSD, like we talk about at least two phases of therapy. The first is safety and stabilization, and only once they have those skills for safety and stabilization do you move on to the second phase, which is processing trauma memories. So a lot of people don't make it to phase two because they either they just keep going into crisis after crisis, or they came to therapy for a reason. They wanted to be a better parent. They feel they did that. They wanted to go back to school. They did that, whatever. So they're done therapy. And even if they hadn't processed their memories. So there is no real minimum number of sessions for single incident. The minimum number would probably be 3 sessions, but only one of them being an EMDR session. There was the qualifications. So there are people who in the States there's a voluntary organization called Emdr, and Emdr is EMDR International Association, and they are a voluntary association. And about 8 years ago, I talked to the director there, and I asked him what percentage of people that go to level 1 training go on to be certified, and he said it's less than 5%. So I said, and what is the majority of people practicing with? And he said, with level 1. So you have the majority of people, even if they've gone through Emdr training, the majority of people have only learned how to process single incident trauma, and they're the majority of people using EMDR right now that are Emdr trained. The problem is that when it started, you had Francine Shapiro. She wrote a dissertation. She said, if you read this, you could do EMDR. And then she did a 3-hour session. Then she did a half day, and then she did a full day, and then it was a weekend. And then they decided, well, one weekend wasn't enough. So you do that weekend, but then do 10 sessions of consultation. And you have to do 50 sessions of EMDR if you want to go on to the next level. And the next level is level 2, where you start working with complex PTSD and more dissociation. And then, so that's another weekend, another like 2.5 day training. And then you do 20 more hours of paid consultation. And then you do 12 more hours of Emdr approved. Usually that would be like either resource development and installation, or if you work with kids, it would just be more specific to what you work with. So 12, and then you have to submit an affidavit that says you've done these things. The people who were your consultants have to send in that you've did these things, and then you are what's called certified in EMDR. So there's only 2 levels. One is you're EMDR trained, or the other is you're EMDR certified. And again, these are voluntary organizations. that means that you don't have to get certified, to use it. You say you're EMDR trained or you're EMDR certified. The only difference is, and this is for the last 15 years I've been doing this, the only difference is when you're certified, you can be a consultant for other people who are going for certification, so you can get paid for that level. I don't have any problem with people being certified in EMDR. I think it's that whatever you want to do. I'm a training junkie, and it didn't make, I went to level 2, and I didn't think certification made sense for me, but that's all it is. It's either you're trained or you're certified. I don't know how it is. You're in the UK, is that right? No,
Yeah.
yes. I don't know what there's somebody in one of my consultation groups who says, I think maybe it's different over there with drug and alcohol, because he says that there's somebody that'll do training, but it's something that they can't do certification. I don't know. Is that wrong? I don't know. Anyway, I guess that's why he's in my consultation group. Did I answer it?
Yeah, I think you've nailed that one. Okay. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all of the questions. We've got about 15 minutes now. So maybe we could
I have
do
one more question here, Niall. What's your advice for anyone to learn EMDR for personal use with family members? I'm not sure if the question is, are you learning it to work to get your family better, or you are a therapist and you want to know if you can use it with your family members? Tal. No, can't say yes because I said two things. Are you a therapist? I'm not a therapist. Oh, well, you can't get trained unless you're a therapist. You can't. I mean, that's what you have to be a therapist to get trained. So, but no matter how much therapy you do, your family doesn't get better. Okay. Yeah, that's one of the qualifications is therapy. Okay, do I have one more? Oh yeah, Q&A. All right, so how about I do that? We have a couple minutes. I'll do guided imagery, and what I'm going to do is just, if people can just sit up like this. I can't see you, so if you're not doing it, it's fine with me. But this is really, if you want to do something with your kids, you want to do something with your family to calm them down, it's one of the best things. Put your feet on the floor. Let's get as comfortable as you can, but you want to have you want to sit up kind of straight here. And you want to if you're comfortable closing your eyes, close your eyes. If not, you want to pick a spot where you won't be distracted. So just look away. You're going to take a slow, deep breath in. And you're going to exhale through pursed lips. And you're going to exhale all the way down. So breathe all the way down till you can't breathe out anymore, to the very end of the exhalation. And then when you can't breathe out any further, just let your body breathe you. So the inhale will come. And then hold again. Hold, 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 hold. And then you're going to exhale for a count of 7. Keep breathing out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Slow breath in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out through pursed lips. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Slow breath in and hold it. And this time you're going to go out with a huff. And then you're just going to take your hands and you're going to put them palms up on your lap. And again, your eyes closed or where you're looking away. And you're just going to bring up an image. And this image is going to be of a container. So it can be anything. It can be a Tupperware container. It could be a shoebox. It could be a bank vault. It could be a hope chest. Anything that you want to use. But what this is going to be for is to contain anything and everything. So people use it before they go to sleep at night, put everything away. Some people will put stuff away before, they take a test. But in therapy, what we say to people is, I'm going to have you think of anything that might be keeping you from being present, and you're going to put it in this container. But we're going to develop the container with a couple of contingencies. One is no part of you or you can be put in the container Everybody else and everything else is fair game. And the reason for that is all parts welcome. You can put feelings away, you can put emotions away, you can put body sensations away, you can put memories away, but you can't put yourself or parts of self away. So you want to put something on this container, like a little note that says that. Now, all the things we're doing are imaginal. So if you notice that, oh, it's not big enough, you can make it bigger. If you notice you want to put it somewhere else, that's fine. But right now, just picture whatever it is that you think was going to work out to be a good container. Why did I pick this? Whatever that answer is, just hold on to that. Just kind of take a look at the container. What are its dimensions? What color is it? How does it close? Is there a lock on it? You want to put something on this container just to say that it's yours. And I don't really have a better way of saying this, but to be opened only when it's in the service of your healing, or to be opened only when it's helpful to you, whatever. But that's the idea. We're not getting rid of these things. These things are just being put away. If they're memories or stuff that you need to work on, that's when you have the resources to do that. You'll take them back in. You'll take them back out of the container when you have the resources to deal with them. That's what we do with the Emdr. We put all the memories not working with, we put them away, and the one we are working with, we bring out. So I'm going to have you open up your container. This is in your imagination. So if it's a lid, you want to use all the muscles in your arms to lift it up. However it is, you want to make it as real as possible, because the nervous system, to the nervous system, perception is reality. So whatever it is that you're picturing, the nervous system believes that's what's happening. So let's think of that container. And once you have it, we're going to put it aside for a second. And I'm going to have you in your kitchen right now. Okay, so you're at the door of your kitchen, or somebody's kitchen that you know well. Notice the lighting in the kitchen. Notice whether you're barefoot, socks, or shoes on. You're going to walk over towards the refrigerator now, and very mindfully, so you can feel as your toe and then the heel, or your heel and the toe hits the floor. Notice any sound it makes as you walk. Again, you're paying attention to the lighting, the temperature, this room. As you continue to walk towards the refrigerator, when you get there, you're going to stop. Feel your feet on the floor, and just bring your awareness to your legs all the way up through your core, your shoulders. And now with your dominant hand, you're going to reach out, very mindfully reaching out towards the handle of the refrigerator. And you're going to open the refrigerator. Feel how much pressure it takes to open the door. And as the door springs open, notice the light. And notice if you're close enough to feel how cold it is. If not, move in a little bit. Now with the light on, the cold there, regardless of what's usually there, today there are 2 pretty big lemons on the top shelf. And what I'd like you to do is reach in again very mindfully and slowly, and you're going to take that lemon in your dominant hand. Allow the refrigerator to close. Now you're going to bring the lemon close to your face. You're just going to kind of brush it on your cheek so you can feel the texture against your cheek. And now you're going to put it in your non-dominant hand, and you're going to run your finger over it. So you're going to notice either how cold it is, you're going to notice the texture, whether it feels waxy or bumpy, however it feels. And you're going to put it down, and wherever you usually do your cutting, that's what you're going to do. You're going to find the sharpest knife for this lemon. You're either going to put it on butcher block or wherever you cut. But again, as mindfully as you can, you're going to hold this lemon in your non-dominant hand, and you're going to begin to cut the lemon. And now as you begin to cut it, some of the lemon juice gets up on your lip. You can either use your tongue or wipe it off, or you can leave it there, no matter. But did you notice how the lemon split? Now there's 2 halves there. You're going to take one of those halves in your non-dominant hand and just move it over a little bit, because this one you're going to do the same thing. You're going to cut that in half. So as you cut it, some of the lemon juice gets on your hands. You can get it off or not, whatever. But notice how both the quarters now are separated. You're going to put the knife down. With your non-dominant hand, you're going to take one of the quarters, and with your dominant hand, you're going to take the other quarter. You're going to bring your non-dominant hand with that lemon wedge up towards your nose. Go very slowly, because what you're going to be doing is sniffing until you smell that lemon citrusy scent. Bring it as close as you have to. If you don't smell it, that's fine too. Just go as close. And when you smell the lemon, it's close enough to your nose, you can smell it, or you don't smell it, you're going to put it down anyway. Because now, with your dominant hand, you're going to move very slowly up towards your nose. This time, you're going to take a great big bite of it. Now you notice the saliva in your mouth increased, yeah? I can see you shaking your heads, right? Was there really a lemon here? Answer is no, but your mind told the body and the body reacts. So when we do these imaginal resources, that's how I introduce them to clients, because the body reacts to what the mind tells it is going on. That's what happens in a flashback too. So what we're going to use that knowledge, and we're going to do some things in the positive. This container that we're doing that you just set aside is one of those things. We're going to contain everything, and it's really just cognitive therapy, right? It's a compartmentalizing things, right? So we're just going to put things away so we can focus on the present. So what I'd like you to do is try to get that image back up of your container, the one that has a note on it that it's yours and it's to be only used in the service of your healing. No parts of you can't go in it. You're going to open it up, and just anything and everything that might be keeping you from being here. It might be the time, might be anxious, any of that you're going to put away. Anything that's bothersome to you right now, you got to put it in to the container. Take all the time you need, but we don't have that much time. So you're going to put everything and anything in there. And once you have it in, you're going to close it up and seal it. Now everything's safely and securely put away. You're going to turn on your heels, and you're going to take about 2 or 3 steps away. And just check in with your body and notice if it feels better, worse. Some people say, I feel lighter, or it feels better. Some people say, I can't leave something in there, or I put something in that container, I have to get it back, or there's more that have to go in there. So if you need more time, you're just going to go back, open the container again. If there's more stuff to put in, or if there's something that can't be in that container, you can take it back out, seal the container back up. And once you have it contained again, closed, sealed, you're going to begin to walk away again. Notice your feet as they hit the floor, and you leave it safely, securely put away. Nobody can get to it but you. You can get to it anytime you want. Now you're going to bring up an image, and this image is of a place. And this image is of a place where you just feel okay, feel comfortable. It can be a real place. It can be a place you always wanted to go. It could be somewhere from a movie. But once you get that image up, I want you to pay attention to all of the sensory data that's there. Is there a scent there? What sounds do you hear? What do you see when you look to the left, to the right? What makes this such a good place for you? And as you answer that question, you're going to put your hands back up on your shoulders, and you're going to take a slow, deep breath in. What makes this such a good place for you? Slow breath in. And on the exhale, you're going to begin the tapping very slowly as you exhale. Exhale all the way down. Exhale. If you can't exhale any further, then let your body take a breath in. And then exhale. You're going to stop the tapping. Now you're just going to deepen this experience in this place here that's such a good place for you. Again, looking all around, noticing what emotions come up for you here, and what makes this such a good place for you. Noticing all the images, everything that's good about this place, and the emotions that come up for you. I'm going to have you take a breath in and begin the tapping again. You're going to exhale as you tap, extending the exhalation, extending the exhalation. And you can stop the tapping. And I'll have you take one last look around this place, knowing it's your place. You can come back here anytime you want. For now, just have you one more time, everything that's good about it. Deep breath in, begin the tapping. Exhaling all the way down, knowing it's your place. You can return when you want. And you can stop the tapping and feel your feet on this floor, your butt in the chair that you're in this room. And very slowly and gently open your eyes and look to the left, to the right. Feeling your feet on the floor. You can kind of feel your arms again, stretch out a little bit, look around. Usually I have people look at each other, but I don't know who you're with. I went a minute over. That's not too bad, you know. Niall. Still with us, Niall? Maybe not. He might have fell asleep. That's the worst thing that can happen, right? Is that you fall asleep during guided imagery. That's not really such a bad deal. Again, if you want any information, Linda at trauma101.com. I have a ton of it. Be very specific about what you want, and I am happy to send it to you. Thank you for your attention. I know I kept you a minute long. I'm very sorry about that. You all right?
Linda, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you
kind
very
sir.
much. I think everybody really appreciated that. So yeah, I just want to say thanks again, and thank you to everybody who tuned in today and for your patience. And you know, this was happening a couple of months ago, so I appreciate you all coming back for the session. So thank you, and best of luck.
Thank you.